She clawed down the hallway while MGM told her to smile, all whilst Clara Bow's name was whispered like a warning. These are 18 of Hollywood's darkest truths, raw, forbidden, and more real than the fame they were paid to protect. Number 1. Judy Garland, a star devoured by the system. In 1939, she followed the yellow brick road into immortality, but no one warned her it would lead straight into a cage. Before Judy Garland became a symbol of stardom, she was a child on a studio leash. With cheeks pinched for color and hunger masked by pills, MGM crafted her into America's sweetheart, bright-eyed, melodic, and heartbreakingly obedient. On screen, she sparkled. Off-screen, she was a product under pressure. Executives told her she was too chubby, too plain, too emotional. So they handed her the tools to become someone else. Pills to wake her up, pills to wind her down, and then expected her to smile for the cameras. By the time she was 19, Judy was already being told which parts of herself were sellable and which had to be hidden. When she became pregnant in 1941, by some accounts with Mickey Rooney or musician David Rose, the studio didn't congratulate her. They allegedly intervened. A baby didn't fit the brand, neither did a young woman with a mind of her own. According to multiple biographies, the studio and her mother urged her to end it, quietly. And she did, not once, but reportedly twice, the price of remaining employable. She kept singing, kept dancing, kept pretending, but her heart was fraying at the edges. MGM knew of her emotional turmoil, her deep exhaustion, her growing reliance on pills, her episodes of despair, and they simply doubled down. When she stumbled, they scolded her. When she disappeared, they replaced her. And when she returned, they reminded her how lucky she was to be allowed back. By the 1950s, she was spiraling. She missed shows, contracts slipped through her fingers. At one point, she stood on stage in London, sweating, trembling, unable to finish a set, and the crowd turned on her, booed her. The same woman who once danced across rainbows now stood beneath a storm of jeers. Judy Garland died at 47 with a strained heart and a history of sedatives. The headlines painted it as a tragic ending. But for Judy, the tragedy had started much earlier. She wasn't destroyed by failure. She was destroyed by being everything Hollywood asked her to be, until it was too much to survive. Number 2. Clara Bow, the it girl nobody protected. In 1928, she was the most desired woman in America, but no one asked what she needed. Clara Bow wasn't just a movie star. She was the roaring 20s, with flapper charm, wild eyes, and a reckless kind of vulnerability. She became Hollywood's first it girl. Her films didn't just sell tickets. They sold desire, freedom, and a new kind of woman. She was untouchable on screen. But off it, she was prey. Raised in poverty in Brooklyn, Clara came from chaos. A father accused of harming her. A mother who once held a knife to her throat during a breakdown. Acting was her escape, but Hollywood didn't offer safety. It offered cameras, contracts, and vultures. Studios didn't protect her. They packaged her, and the press, drunk on gossip, tore her to shreds. As Clara's fame exploded, so did the rumors, affairs, secret scandals, wild parties. She was accused of everything from inappropriate behavior to sleeping her way up the ladder. Some stories were pure fabrication, others blurred by Hollywood's haze. What mattered wasn't the truth. It was the spectacle. Her own secretary betrayed her, selling gossip to tabloids for headlines. And when Clara finally tried to defend herself in court, the industry turned its back. Behind the scenes, she was spiraling. She struggled to sleep, couldn't trust those closest to her, and battled what today would likely be called severe anxiety or mental illness. Her emotions were often dismissed as hysteria, and the studio's solution was to force her back in front of the lens. When she faltered, they called her difficult. By 1933, at just 28 years old, Clara Bow, once the biggest star in the world, walked away from the screen. Her final film faded into obscurity. She married cowboy actor Rex Bell and tried to live quietly, but the damage was already done. She would spend years battling inner storms in private, far from the spotlights that once devoured her. The girl who brought electricity to silent film ended up barely heard at all. In a town built on fantasy, Clara Bow gave the world everything it wanted. But when she needed grace, Hollywood offered silence. Number 3. Jean Tierney, The Price of a Studio Smile. In 1945, she was the face every woman envied and every man adored. But behind her beauty was a heartbreak no script could rewrite. Jean Tierney didn't just light up the screen, she haunted it. With her crystalline eyes and that cool porcelain elegance, she became a sensation in films like Laura and Leave Her to Heaven. The studios paraded her as perfection, but no one saw what was quietly breaking behind the camera. In 1943, Tierney attended a wartime Hollywood canteen event to boost morale for soldiers. She was glowing, gracious, a vision. But one fan in the crowd, desperate to meet her, had recently left quarantine for a contagious illness. That single encounter would alter Tierney's life forever. Months later, Jean gave birth to a daughter, Daria, born with severe disabilities. The child was deaf, partially blind, and neurologically impaired. Doctors quietly traced it back to prenatal exposure from that fan's illness. Tierney was devastated. She blamed herself, and yet, in public, she was expected to pose and smile like nothing had happened. She threw herself back into work. More roles, more gowns, more appearances. But the grief never left. In the years that followed, Tierney began battling what she later described as long spells of darkness. She struggled with memory, focus, and what doctors at the time called exhaustion. But the whispers grew louder. She was unreliable, unstable. The very studios that had once sculpted her image now began quietly distancing themselves. By the early 1950s, Jean checked into various hospitals to seek help. Some treatments were aggressive, even controversial. Her personal demons nearly cost her everything: career, family, even her will to keep going. And yet, she endured. She returned to the screen briefly in the late 50s, but the magic had faded. Hollywood, always eager for the next face, had already moved on. Years later, in a chilling twist, Tierney met the fan who had unknowingly passed on the illness. The woman smiled and told her, "I stood in line to meet you at the canteen." It was worth it. Jean simply stared. Because for all the glamour, for all the beauty, what the world never saw was the price she paid for a single photo op and a lifetime of silence that followed. Number 4. Peter Lawford, Hollywood's exiled Kennedy. In the 1950s, he had the charm of Cary Grant, the smile of a Kennedy, and a front-row seat to America's most powerful inner circle, until everything slipped through his fingers. Peter Lawford was the golden boy with a British accent, suave, witty, and effortlessly likable. A rising MGM star who became a household name in films like Easter Parade and The White Cliffs of Dover, Lawford was more than just a matinee idol. In 1954, he married Patricia Kennedy, the glamorous sister of future President John F. Kennedy. And suddenly, he wasn't just in Hollywood royalty. He was American royalty. The press called him the Hollywood Kennedy. And for a while, the title fit. He joined Sinatra's Rat Pack, hosted glittering parties in Malibu, and served as the bridge between Washington and the movie capital. He brought Marilyn Monroe to meet JFK. He was there for the whispers, the dinners, the secrets behind closed doors. But secrets, in Hollywood or politics, have a shelf life. After Monroe's death in 1962, speculation swirled. Many believe she tried to contact the Kennedys shortly before she passed. Lawford, caught in the middle, reportedly ignored her calls. Whether that's true or not, the guilt haunted him, and the Kennedy family never quite forgave the shadow his name cast on the legacy. By the mid-60s, Lawford's career began to dim. He was allegedly drinking heavily, missing calls, losing roles. Sinatra, once a close friend, turned his back after a personal falling out involving JFK. The invitations stopped. The phone rang less. And the charming Brit with the million-dollar grin was quietly replaced by newer, safer stars. Behind the scenes, Lawford struggled to stay sober and keep his finances in check. Divorced from Pat, estranged from his former circle, he spent his later years drifting between television cameos and faded memories of a spotlight that once burned too brightly. He died in 1984 at the age of 61, not with the fanfare of a statesman or a leading man, but quietly, almost forgotten by the world that once revolved around him. Peter Lawford wasn't undone by one scandal. He was erased by silence. In the end, Hollywood didn't exile him. It simply stopped answering the door. Number 5. Susan Hayward, the woman who glowed too bright. In 1956, she stood in the blazing desert, drenched in sunlight and stardom, but no one knew the glow might kill her. Susan Hayward had the fire of a woman who never begged for permission. A fiery redhead with a storm behind her eyes, she carved her way through the studio system, tough, relentless, and undeniably magnetic. She earned 5 Oscar nominations, finally winning for I Want to Live. In 1959, on screen, she was electric. Off-screen, she was one of the few women in Hollywood who dared to take control of her career. But it was The Conqueror, a lavish epic shot in the Utah desert that would cast a shadow over her legacy. Produced by Howard Hughes and starring John Wayne as Genghis Khan, the film was mocked for its wild casting, but no one was laughing years later. The location had been downwind of a nuclear testing site. The U.S. government had detonated dozens of bombs there, and the sand still whispered with radiation. Hayward, like many of her co-stars, spent weeks breathing it in. Decades later, the numbers became haunting. Out of the 220 cast and crew members, nearly half would develop cancer. Director Dick Powell, leading lady Susan Hayward, Wayne himself. Some called it a coincidence, others a cover-up. Either way, the statistics felt too cruel to ignore. Susan's diagnosis came in the early 70s, an aggressive form of the disease. She fought with the same defiance she brought to her roles, but her health deteriorated quickly. Her final public appearances showed a woman visibly weakened, yet still wrapped in elegance. Still acting, still fighting. She passed away in 1975, just 57 years old. By then, The Conqueror had become a legend for all the wrong reasons, a film so cursed it blurred the line between fiction and fallout. And yet, Hayward never once played the victim. Even in her final interviews, she remained poised, guarded, a star to the very end. Susan Hayward burned with talent, rage, and ambition. But sometimes, the brightest lights are the first to fade, especially when they're lit by something invisible. Number 6. Merle Oberon, the star who hid her face and her past. In 1935, she became the first woman of color nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. But almost no one knew she wasn't white. Merle Oberon dazzled with a kind of beauty that seemed born for black and white film. Luminous skin, almond eyes, and an elegance that made directors swoon. In The Dark Angel and Wuthering Heights, she played noble women with effortless poise. But the real story wasn't in the lines she delivered. It was in the life she buried. Born in Bombay, British India, Merle didn't grow up in the luxury Hollywood would later assign her. She was raised in poverty, and her birth records were clouded with secrecy. Her mother was reportedly of Sri Lankan or Maori descent, a racial background that in 1930s Hollywood would have disqualified her from stardom before she ever walked onto a set. So she changed everything. She claimed she was born in Tasmania and schooled in England. The truth was rewritten. Family members were recast. Her own mother was presented as her maid. Even as the years passed and questions arose, Merle stuck to the script. She used skin-lightening creams, avoided the sun, maintained the illusion with the precision of a character she could never stop playing. But secrets weigh more than accolades. In private, Merle was haunted by the lie. During a car accident in the 1930s, her face was badly scarred. For most actresses, it would have been a career-ending injury. For Merle, it was nearly identity-shattering. She kept mirrors covered in her home for years, unable to look at herself without feeling the fracture between who she was and who the world thought she had to be. Even her husband, famed cinematographer Lucien Ballard, allegedly didn't know her full background during their early years together. And when the truth finally came to light, long after her death in 1979, many fans were stunned. But those who looked closely always saw it. The slight pause before she spoke of her past. The way she stepped into the light, like it could expose her. Merle Oberon became famous for her face, but it was the face she couldn't claim that defined her deepest sorrow. Because in the end, she didn't just hide her heritage, she hid herself, and the price of erasing your roots is that you may never fully bloom. Number 7. Montgomery Clift, The Beautiful Tragedy. In 1951, he was the future of acting. Graceful, intense, untouchable. But within 5 years, he could barely recognize the face staring back at him in the mirror. Montgomery Clift wasn't just a star. He was a force. Quiet, brooding, and heartbreakingly real, he brought vulnerability to the screen that no one had seen before. A Place in the Sun, From Here to Eternity. Judgment at Nuremberg. His performances didn't feel performed. They felt lived. He was James Dean before Dean ever picked up a script. But behind that cinematic intimacy was a man walking a tightrope between genius and agony, image and identity. In May of 1956, everything changed. Clift was leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home when he crashed his car into a telephone pole on a winding Beverly Hills road. The damage was catastrophic. His face was shattered. Jaw, nose, cheekbone, requiring hours of reconstructive surgery. Elizabeth Taylor, in her gown and heels, was the first on the scene. She reportedly reached into his throat to save him from choking on a broken tooth. He returned to acting, but the change was immediate and brutal. The Montgomery Clift audiences remembered. Delicate, luminous, otherworldly, was gone. His face, though skillfully repaired, looked different, more haunted. His speech slurred, his timing just slightly off. Studios whispered, critics noticed. And Clift, once so careful, began leaning heavily on medication and the bottle to dull both the pain and the comparisons. He never stopped working. But the roles were fewer, the sets more strained. Friends said he rarely smiled. He spent hours locked in hotel rooms, staring at the wall, drifting between regret and silence. He was still brilliant, especially in The Misfits and Freud. But now, every performance carried the weight of someone who was fighting his own body just to get through a scene. Clift died in 1966, at just 45 years old. Heart failure, they said. But those closest to him knew. His real heartbreak had begun long before. Montgomery Clift didn't vanish overnight. He faded like a photograph left in the sun. Still beautiful, still there, just harder and harder to see. Number 8. Gail Russell, the studio's ghost girl. In 1944, she was Paramount's shimmering new ingenue. But fame didn't make her shine. It made her disappear. Gail Russell was never supposed to be an actress. Shy to the point of trembling, she could barely make eye contact during auditions. But the camera loved her. Those wide, haunted eyes, that soft voice that seemed born for black and white tragedy. Paramount signed her at just 19. Banking on her delicate beauty and vulnerability. But behind her angelic screen presence was a young woman barely holding it together. Her breakout role came in The Uninvited, a supernatural romance where she played a girl haunted by ghosts. Audiences were captivated. What they didn't know was that Gail herself felt just as haunted. Stage fright consumed her, She was known to shake during takes, her hands hidden in costume folds to keep the nerves from showing. The studio's solution wasn't compassion, it was pressure. They fed her lines about image, control, and responsibility. They warned her to be perfect, and when she couldn't be, they whispered. To calm her nerves, Gail allegedly began turning to the bottle, first before shoots, then between them. It worked. For a while, she filmed hits with John Wayne, starred in Angel and The Bad Man, and seemed to be rising. But word spread fast in Hollywood. By the early 50s, her behavior became harder to mask. Slurred lines, missed calls, emotional breakdowns on set. Paramount dropped her. Friends faded. And the girl who once floated through ghost stories found herself vanishing in real life. She made a brief comeback in the late 50s, trying to prove she could stay sober and salvage her career. But the roles were smaller, the confidence weaker. Her health declined, her spirit followed. In 1961, Gail Russell was found alone in her small Los Angeles apartment, surrounded by empty bottles and unopened fan mail. She had passed quietly at just 36. The cause was liver failure, but the industry had failed her long before that. She once said in an interview, "I didn't want to be a star, I just wanted to be happy." But Hollywood didn't need her to be happy. It needed her to perform, and when she couldn't, she simply faded, like a ghost caught between scenes. Number 9. Charles Boyer, the devoted husband with a secret despair. In 1944, he was the smooth-talking lover every woman dreamed of. But behind closed doors, Charles Boyer was clinging to the only thing that ever made him feel real love. With a deep, accented voice and eyes that lingered just a second too long, Charles Boyer carved out a career as Hollywood's ultimate continental heartthrob. He played suave villains and seductive gentlemen, the kind of man who could destroy a woman with a whisper. Gaslight, Algiers, love affair. His presence was velvet-draped charisma. But off-camera, he wasn't chasing hearts. He had already given his away. In 1934, Boyer met British actress Pat Patterson. She wasn't the most famous woman in the room, but she was the only one who made him feel grounded. They married quickly and stayed together for over 4 decades, a rarity in Hollywood. Through fame, wartime, and the shifting tides of cinema, Charles remained fiercely loyal to her. But even devotion can't protect from time. By the 1960s, Boyer's career began to slow. The roles dried up, the spotlight dimmed, and he gracefully stepped back, content, it seemed, to enjoy life with Pat. Yet behind the scenes, there were rumors of private sadness, that beneath his charm lived a man prone to brooding, a man who, without a script to follow, often drifted into silence. In 1978, Pat was diagnosed with cancer. Boyer stayed by her side, refusing to leave her bedside. He watched the light fade from her eyes, and with it, his reason for staying. Just 2 days after Pat passed, Charles followed. The cause was officially a heart attack, but many believe it was grief that broke him, that his spirit, so long tied to hers, simply couldn't go on. It wasn't a scandal, it wasn't a headline, but it was perhaps the most human heartbreak of them all. Charles Boyer played the man every woman wanted, but he gave himself completely to one, and when she left, he didn't want to act anymore. Not in life, not in grief, only in love did he ever feel fully seen. Number 10. Frances Farmer, Sanity on Trial. In 1937, she was hailed as the next Katharine Hepburn, brilliant, beautiful, rebellious. But in just a few years, she wasn't on set. She was on trial for her sanity. Frances Farmer never fit the mold. While other starlets smiled through interviews and danced on command, Frances quoted Nietzsche and challenged authority. She lit up the screen in Come and Get It and Rhythm on the Range, but refused to play the Hollywood game. Studio heads called her difficult. She called them controlling. And in an industry that punished defiance, her independence came at a cost. Her behavior became erratic. She missed calls, snapped at producers, lashed out at the press, but beneath it all, something deeper was unraveling. An alleged struggle with depression that grew heavier with each passing headline. By 1943, she was arrested in Los Angeles after an altercation at a beauty salon. It made national news. The once golden star, dragged from court in handcuffs, screaming as cameras flashed. She was institutionalized soon after. What followed has become a fog of fact and horror. Frances spent years in and out of mental hospitals. Some reports claim she endured cruel treatments, forced confinement. Even worse, her story was often twisted by tabloids and sensational memoirs, blurring truth and myth. But one thing remains certain. Frances Farmer was not protected. She was silenced. Her mother took over legal guardianship, and for years Frances lived like a ghost, hidden away, her career buried beneath scandal and stigma. Hollywood had moved on. The fans forgot. The girl with fire in her voice and steel in her spine was now just a whispered cautionary tale. In the late 1950s, she resurfaced. Quieter, older, changed. She made a few television appearances, even hosted a local talk show in Indianapolis. But the light was dimmer. The edge had been dulled. And though she smiled for the cameras, you could see it in her eyes, the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones when the world has tried to erase you. Frances Farmer died in 1970 at 56. No big tribute, no final role. She challenged the system, and the system declared her unfit to speak. And in doing so, it asked the world to forget the most dangerous thing she ever had, a voice that wouldn't stay quiet. Number 11. Dorothy Dandridge. Beauty couldn't save her. In 1955, she stood on the Oscars stage, radiant, groundbreaking, unforgettable. But history only gave her the spotlight for a moment, and then stepped aside. Dorothy Dandridge was the first black woman nominated for Best Actress. When she walked into the room, silence followed. Not from awe alone, but from discomfort. Hollywood didn't know what to do with her. She was too glamorous for the roles they offered, too talented to ignore, and far too bold to play quiet. Her performance in Carmen Jones wasn't just captivating, it was revolutionary. Audiences fell in love with her. Magazines wanted her on the cover. But while she was lighting up movie screens, studio executives were quietly dimming her future. Leading roles stopped coming. She was offered maids, dancers, side characters. Never the love interest again. Not after she had dared to be the star. She fought back, but the walls were too high. Racism wasn't subtle in the 1950s, especially not in contracts. She was allowed to sing in Vegas, but couldn't walk through the front door of the hotel. She could entertain crowds, but couldn't swim in the same pool. One night, after she dipped a toe in the water, the hotel drained it entirely. Her career began to unravel as she battled constant rejection and legal trouble, failed marriages, financial collapse, custody battles over her special needs daughter. It all piled up. By the early 1960s, she was struggling to stay afloat. The woman who once had gowns custom-made by Dior was now piecing together income from nightclub appearances. In 1965, Dorothy Dandridge was found in her Los Angeles apartment, gone at just 42. The official cause: a fatal mix of prescription medication. Some called it an accident. Others whispered about despair. But all agreed Hollywood had failed her. Her death made headlines, but not history books. Not for decades. Dorothy Dandridge had everything they said a star needed: beauty, talent, elegance, but not the one thing she truly deserved: a fair chance. And in the end, her story became a cautionary tale, not about fame, but about how even the brightest lights can be left flickering in the shadows. Number 12. Sal Mineo, the Forgotten Rebel. In 1955, he was the boy who bled for James Dean, a rebel with his heart on his sleeve. But by the time he turned 30, Hollywood had already stopped calling. Sal Mineo's rise was meteoric. He was just 16 when he stole scenes in Rebel Without a Cause, delivering a performance so raw and tender it earned him an Oscar nomination. Audiences fell for his vulnerability, that quiet ache behind his eyes. He wasn't the tough guy or the heartthrob. He was the kid who felt too much in a world that didn't want men to feel at all. For a moment, he was everywhere. Teen magazines dubbed him the Switchblade Kid, and studios lined up to offer him roles. But behind the fame was a deeper challenge, one he couldn't outrun. Sal was rumored to live a life that didn't fit Hollywood's image of masculinity. Whispers about his personal relationships circled, quietly blacklisting him from the kinds of roles he once landed with ease. Leading men were expected to play by a different rulebook. Sal didn't. By the 1960s, the offers had thinned. He tried to reinvent himself, took on stage work, directed, even embraced roles that reflected his real-life identity. But the town that once celebrated his sensitivity now seemed to resent it. He was no longer the fresh-faced rebel, just another actor struggling to prove he hadn't peaked too young. Still, he fought to come back. In the mid-70s, he was finally gaining traction again. Cast in a promising new play, excited about life, finally sober and steady. Friends said he was optimistic, energized, ready for Act 2. But in 1976, that comeback was cut short. One night, returning to his West Hollywood apartment, Sal Mineo was attacked in a parking lot, a senseless act of violence that ended his life at just 37. The motive had nothing to do with fame. It wasn't revenge or scandal, just wrong place, wrong time. His death barely made the front pages. Sal Mineo gave us one of the most sensitive performances of the 1950s, and then quietly faded into the shadows he once acted his way out of. Hollywood loved him when he was tragic on screen, but when that tragedy became real, they looked away. Number 13. Linda Darnell, burned by her own stardom. In 1947, she was crowned the most beautiful woman in Hollywood. Less than 2 decades later, she died watching herself burn on screen. Linda Darnell wasn't just beautiful. She was otherworldly. With smoldering eyes and a voice that could melt a room, she lit up the screen in hits like Forever Amber and A Letter to Three Wives. She had a rare blend of softness and strength, sensuality and grace. But behind that polished image was a woman relentlessly pushed by studios, by critics, and by the cruel ticking of Hollywood's clock. She'd been groomed for fame from adolescence. Fox signed her at just 15, lied about her age, and pushed her into adult roles before she'd had the chance to live one. By the time she was 22, she'd played Cleopatra, a mistress, and a martyr. But the roles she longed for, complex, serious, respected, were always dangled just out of reach. By the early 1950s, Darnell's star began to dim. She battled insecurities, heartbreak, and a carousel of broken promises from the men around her. Lovers, husbands, and executives who used her beauty but rarely fought for her talent. As younger actresses flooded in, she found herself edged out of lead roles. Offers slowed. Her finances crumbled. She turned to television and stage work to stay afloat. Still, she held on to the hope of a comeback, something dignified, something lasting. And just when things were looking up, fate dealt one final cruel blow. In April of 1965, Darnell was staying at a friend's house in Illinois. That night, Stardust, one of her early films, happened to be airing on TV. She reportedly sat in the living room, watching her younger self flicker in black and white. Hours later, the house caught fire. Trapped on the second floor, she was critically burned trying to save the homeowner's child. She survived the flames, but only for a short while. Her body was too damaged. She died at 41. Linda Darnell spent her life being consumed by beauty, until, tragically, it consumed her for real. She was watching her own star rise, just moments before everything turned to ash. Number 14. Lupe Vélez, the Mexican Spitfire, and a death they got all wrong. In the 1930s, she was fire-bottled in silk, fierce, flirtatious, and utterly unforgettable. But decades later, she became a punchline in a rumor that buried her legacy. Lupe Vélez burst onto the silent screen like a thunderclap. Not demure, not delicate, but alive. Her energy was chaotic, magnetic, impossible to cage. In an industry obsessed with blonde softness, she was a brunette storm from Mexico, with a laugh that could cut through any room. Nicknamed the Mexican Spitfire, she starred in dozens of films and became a household name, known for her quick wit, signature accent, and fearless flair. But Lupe didn't just fight for roles. She fought for respect. Hollywood loved her passion but mocked her temper. They cast her as wild and fiery, but never gave her space to be soft. Behind the camera, she battled the same studios that cashed in on her image. When she tried to speak seriously about her craft or her roots, they redirected the conversation to her romances, and those, too, became tabloid fodder. Her relationships with stars like Gary Cooper and Johnny Weissmuller were dramatic, public, and often short-lived. She longed for something lasting, not just a man, but a home, a child, a future beyond the screen. In 1944, she reportedly became pregnant by a younger actor who refused to marry her. In an era where single motherhood could destroy a career, Lupe felt trapped. Her death that year was sudden, a fatal mix of sleeping pills taken in her Beverly Hills home. But what followed was even more cruel. A rumor began to spread that she had passed in the bathroom, a humiliating tale invented years later by a writer trying to be clever. The myth overshadowed the woman. Lupe Vélez, who'd built her career with grit and fire, was reduced to a tasteless joke. But that wasn't her ending. The truth, she died alone, yes, but not forgotten. She had been brave, bold, and ahead of her time. A woman who demanded to be seen in a town built to erase difference. Lupe Vélez wasn't a tragedy. She was a force. And the only shame in her story is how easily Hollywood let her become a rumor instead of the legacy she deserved. Number 15. Marie McDonald. The Body Disappears. In the 1940s, she was known simply as The Body. But behind the curves and camera flashes, Marie McDonald was unraveling, one strange headline at a time. Marie McDonald had the kind of beauty that made producers forget the plot. With her hourglass figure and a coy, camera-ready smile, she became a pin-up dream during World War II. The kind soldiers painted on planes and carried in their pockets. She starred in comedies and musicals, danced across glitzy sound stages, and married a millionaire. On paper, it looked like she had won the Hollywood lottery. But Marie wanted to be more than a poster. She wanted dramatic roles, to be taken seriously. Studios didn't listen. They cast her for her shape, not her soul. And as the years passed, the fame that once felt like power started to feel like a trap. Her personal life made more headlines than her films. Multiple marriages, high-profile affairs, and custody battles kept her in the press, but not in a flattering light. Then came the most bizarre twist of all. In January of 1957, Marie disappeared. Police launched a search. Rumors flew. And then, suddenly, she reappeared. Shaken, confused, claiming she'd been abducted by two men. The story had holes. Some believed her. Others accused her of fabricating the entire event for publicity or out of desperation. Either way, the damage was done. The press dubbed it the kidnap mystery, and her credibility, already fragile, shattered completely. Hollywood didn't offer second chances to women like Marie. The roles stopped. The phone stopped ringing. She tried stage work, tried reinvention, but the spotlight had moved on. In 1965, she was found in her home, a fatal mix of medications at just 42. The official report suggested an accident, but the public, already primed for scandal, assumed otherwise. Marie McDonald was buried under a nickname she never asked for. She was called The Body, but never the mind, never the heart, never the woman. And when she vanished from the screen, No one asked why, only how dramatic the ending might be. Number 16. Jean Peters, the starlet who walked away. In 1952, she was stealing scenes from Marilyn Monroe. A decade later, she vanished so completely, the tabloids thought she'd died. Jean Peters wasn't your typical bombshell. She had the face of a pinup, sure, but none of the hunger for fame that usually came with it. Studios saw her as the next big thing. She starred opposite Tyrone Power, Joseph Cotton, Marlon Brando, and in Pickup on South Street, she gave a performance that was all steel and vulnerability. A woman who knew the gutter and the glitter. But behind the scenes, Jean bristled at the way Hollywood treated women. She hated the studio system's tight leash. She fought against the glamour machine that tried to turn her into another one-note beauty. She wore simple clothes, refused to pose in swimsuits, and insisted on being seen as an actress, not an ornament. And then she met Howard Hughes. Their connection began quietly. At first, it seemed like any whirlwind Hollywood romance, intense, mysterious, almost cinematic. But Hughes wasn't just any suitor. He was one of the most powerful and paranoid men in the world. When they married in 1957, John all but disappeared from public life. No red carpets, no interviews, no more films. What followed wasn't a happily ever after. It was silence. While Hughes retreated further into isolation and conspiracy, John became a ghost of her former self. Friends said she was kept away from the public, from work, even from social circles. And yet, she never went to the press, never told her side. When they quietly divorced in 1971, she reemerged, not in Hollywood, but in a classroom. She earned a degree, lived modestly, taught. She didn't chase a comeback. She chased peace. The irony? Jean Peters may have been one of the few who left Hollywood before it could break her. She didn't vanish because she fell. She vanished because she ran. From the lights, from the lies, from a system that only valued her on its terms. And for once, that escape wasn't a scandal. It was survival, in plain sight. Number 17. Barbara Payton, the fallen beauty. In 1950, Barbara Payton could walk into any room in Hollywood and leave it smoldering behind her. By 1967, she was unrecognizable, broke, bruised, and begging for change on Sunset Boulevard. Barbara was the kind of beauty that made headlines: platinum hair, a dangerous smile, and a magnetism that made cameras fall in love too fast. Her breakout in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye opposite James Cagney proved she wasn't just a pretty face. Critics buzzed, studios lined up, and for a moment, it seemed Barbara was unstoppable. But what the cameras didn't catch was how chaotic her off-screen life had already become. She was torn between two men, actor Francho Tone and the volatile Tom Neal. The love triangle spiraled into a violent spectacle that captivated the tabloids. Neal beat Tone so badly, he ended up in the hospital with a fractured cheekbone and a broken nose. Instead of pulling back, Barbara doubled down, choosing Neal and igniting one of Hollywood's most public scandals. Studios panicked. Scripts dried up. By 1953, her once promising career was collapsing under the weight of her own decisions. Barbara couldn't stay sober. She bounced from low-budget B-movies to courtroom dramas in real life, divorces, arrests, and spiraling finances. At one point, she posed for adult magazines just to cover basic expenses. Later, she allegedly began selling herself on the streets of Los Angeles, a brutal, unspoken reality that the town whispered about but never publicly acknowledged. By the mid-60s, her former co-stars were aging gracefully. Barbara was living in a dingy motel, struggling to survive. When she passed away at just 39, the cause was officially listed as heart and liver failure. But anyone who knew her story understood the real toll had started long before. She once wrote, "I've made a lot of mistakes. I guess I'll keep making them." That wasn't an apology. It was a quiet admission that Hollywood never taught her how to survive outside the spotlight it built. Barbara Payton wasn't destroyed by a single scandal. She was slowly undone by a system that adored beauty, but never taught it how to last. Number 18. Elizabeth Hartman, the girl with the saddest eyes. In 1965, Elizabeth Hartman made her film debut and earned an Oscar nomination. She was just 22, the youngest nominee that year, and yet, somehow, she already looked tired. There was something about her eyes, wide, fragile, knowing. Critics called her haunting. Directors called her pure. But behind the camera, Elizabeth Hartman was already carrying something heavy. She was brilliant, no doubt, sensitive, deeply. But Hollywood didn't care for women who felt too much, unless they knew how to hide it. Her breakthrough role in A Patch of Blue wasn't just a performance. It felt like a warning. She played a blind girl escaping an abusive home, searching for gentleness in a brutal world. Off-screen, the parallels weren't far off. Over the next decade, Elizabeth turned down roles constantly. Too anxious, too overwhelmed, too wary of the spotlight. Friends said she struggled with deep emotional lows. She'd vanish from industry events, retreat from film sets, or pull away just when her star was about to rise again. One director called her a shadow with talent. By the 1970s, the industry had moved on. Younger starlets were arriving. Elizabeth, once compared to Audrey Hepburn, was quietly forgotten. She took a job at a museum in Pittsburgh. Visitors had no idea they were buying tickets from an Oscar nominee. Occasionally, she'd lend her voice to a project, most famously as Mrs. Brisby in The Secret of NIMA. Even animated, her voice carried that same quiet ache, a yearning for safety, a longing for peace. But peace didn't come easily. Her personal demons lingered, her career remained stalled, and the public, so quick to applaud her arrival, barely noticed her absence. She passed in 1987, at just 43. The news barely made headlines. Hollywood loves a dramatic rise, but it forgets the gentle ones, the stars who didn't fight for attention, who faded without spectacle. Elizabeth Hartman didn't burn out in scandal, she dimmed quietly, like a candle trying to light a room that didn't want to be warm. She wasn't a tragic tale of bad choices. She was a soft soul in a world that rewarded armor. And in the end, her saddest eyes were telling the truth all along. Let me know when you're ready for the outro. They chased dreams through smoke and mirrors. Some vanished, some were destroyed, and a few were never seen for who they truly were. But their stories remain, haunting the edges of Hollywood's polished frame. If these truths moved you, leave a comment, like the video so more eyes find them, and subscribe for the legends, the losses, and the ones still whispering from the shadows.